present Organ Music with Michael Dudman. Hello, I'm Graham Wilson. That theme introduces a regular Sunday night program on 2NUR, Organ Music with Michael Dudman. In this special edition of Aspects from the Conservatorium, we celebrate Professor Dudman's 25th year performing and teaching in Newcastle. We'll hear music associated with his studies in Paris, a recording he made as artist-in-residence at the Sydney Opera House, as well as some recordings from organs he played in the United States, in Canada, and at the University of Newcastle Conservatorium, where he is the Dean of Music. We'll hear Michael talk about some of the highlights of his career in Newcastle, and he'll tell us his hopes for the future of music in this region. But let's begin at the beginning. What was Michael Dudman's early attraction to the pipe organ?
I don't know how much force should be given to the factors of heredity and environment in this. Certainly, when I was a child, I used to be taken by my father to hear organists play all over Sydney. We'd do pilgrimages to churches and often listen to organists play for services and weddings and so on. I can recall two things particularly from those years. One was a visit to, or a number of visits to St Mary's Cathedral in Sydney. There was an elderly organist there whose name was Dawkins, and Mr Dawkins could make some quite splendid sounds on two instruments that were then there, an old Jackson organ, long since gone, in the nave of the building, and an organ which is still there in the Western Gallery of St Mary's. And this, I think, made a deep impression on me, the sort of rolling, sonorous sounds that instruments could make in that setting. I also used to go often to St Philip's Church Hill, where another organist, also of a great age, Mr W.H. Monk, used to play. And certainly there are very vivid and lasting memories of Mr Monk's playing and of the colours of the St Philip's organ.
Is that the sort of thing that you think a parent today should do, take their children to experience music like that?
Well, looking back on it, it was certainly a wonderful and I guess fairly unusual sort of experience. I mentioned, the idea of these things being running in the family and hereditary playing a part, and I was astonished a few years ago to come across in a book entitled Ghosts and Grease Paint by Hugh Walpole a reference to a J. Mortimer Dudman who gave an organ recital in a London music hall. I think it was called the Aquarium. I tried at the time to find out some information about it, and it's very, very difficult because these buildings have all departed. But apparently they were sort of 19th century developments of the 18th century London pleasure garden. There was a bit of this and a bit of that and some music. People would walk around. There were colonnades of shops and so on. Anyway, J. Mortimer Dudman gave a concert. There was an associate artist who played the trumpet, and the program was the sort of thing that we might expect from concerts of that period. Quite a mixture, a few transcriptions, and the trumpeter played the slow movement of the Haydn concerto. Now, I don't know, Dudman isn't a particularly common name. There are a few Dudmans in England, and whether there were organists in our remote background seems possible.
Mm. But certainly you're the first one that you know of in the family.
Yes.
And your father just had an interest in organ music, not as a performer.
That's right.
Yeah.
He was an engineer. He was born in England. As a child, I think he loved listening to organ music and used to speak of the organs he'd heard in great cathedrals in England. But it was he, certainly, who introduced me to organ music and to the opportunity of playing organs when I was young.
Now, you gave your first concert at a fairly young age too, didn't you?
Yes, I gave a Sunday afternoon organ concert at a church called St Saviour's in Redfern. I think I could probably lead you to where the church used to be, but it's been demolished now. There was a big three-manual organ there, and that was the first one, I think. But from then onwards, I used to inflict myself on people quite a lot playing the organ. I played a solo at Sydney Town Hall in a schools concert when I was 15, and I had a church organist's job at a church in Haberfield, St Oswald's, when I was 16, and from that time onwards I've played pretty well continually, with odd breaks off here and there.
Is it something that came fairly naturally to you? I don't mean to say that there was no work involved in practicing, but it's something that the organ falls under your hands very easily?
Well, certainly the organ was the instrument I wanted to play. When I went to the conservatorium as a full-time student, I studied the piano as well, and indeed I kept the two going in tandem for almost the whole of my time there. I loved playing the organ, and it was obvious to me too then that there were many people who could play the piano really very well indeed, and I was going to find it difficult to keep up with the competition there, whereas my organ playing seemed to be something which I was more comfortable with.
How did you go about studying?
I had, I was really self-taught to begin with, because my lessons with Norman Johnston, a wonderful Australian musician, didn't begin until I went to the conservatorium, and I guess I'd have been 16 or 17 then, and so everything I'd done before then, I'd done on my own. I don't know that was altogether a good thing. I played, I think, with a certain amount of natural flair maybe, but it might have been easier for me if I'd had formal lessons and learnt to do things the right way, right from scratch. But however that may be, that's the way it happened. Then after lessons with Norman and graduating from the conservatorium, I had the opportunity to go overseas for study because I won the Vasanta scholarship, and continued studying then with André Marchal. Norman Johnston had been a student with Marchal in Paris some years before, and so it seemed a fairly natural transition there.
And Marchal himself was a pupil of Vienne?
I'm not altogether certain. He was certainly steeped in the tradition there. Whether I rather think it was Eugène Gigoux with whom Marchal himself studied, and perhaps other people as well. Of course, Marchal was blind from birth, and the French have a wonderful tradition of teaching music to blind people, and indeed their own institute, the Jeune Aveugle, the Institute for the Young Blind, and Marchal, I think, studied there, and subsequently he taught there, and in a very wonderful gesture they were eventually to dedicate the concert hall there with its large organ to Marchal, and it's known as the I think Salon André Marchal, the concert hall at that institute. He was a wonderful improviser, and there's a tradition in France for this, for organists improvising on themes. Sometimes they do this at concerts. People hand them or play for them a theme, and at very short notice, after a couple of minutes considering the implications of the theme, they'll play quite a large-scale work. Now, Marchal almost always improvised at his concerts. The last piece on the program was an improvisation, and tragically, very, very few of these improvisations have been recorded. These wonderful feats of musicianship have just disappeared into thin air. But for the opening of the Royal Festival Hall organ, at which Marshall was one of the distinguished recitalists to give a concert, they did record this extemporisation on a theme which was submitted by Sir George Dyson, and it gives some idea of the astonishing brilliance and spontaneity of Marshall's playing.
Going to Paris, Michael, from Sydney, was that something that came as a surprise to you when you won that scholarship, or were you destined for that kind of overseas study anyway?
Well, I was very delighted. I was overjoyed to win the scholarship, because I couldn't have managed to go overseas, certainly at that time, without it. I remember a great feeling of excitement there. I was handicapped to some extent by speaking only a very limited amount of French, but the effect of living in Paris and working with Marshall was really quite wonderful. I think in one of Hemingway's books he makes some reference, which I can't quote exactly, to the effect that anybody who has had the opportunity of living in Paris when young carries that experience always with them, and I certainly think that's true in my case. It's a very, very beautiful city, full of interest in music, of course, a wonderful musical tradition, and a real home and centre for brilliance in organ playing.
Certainly there's a fine tradition, and I noticed in your concerts it's certainly the main focus of your music. Is that the main body of the organ repertoire, or is there quite another school, perhaps in England?
Yes, there are strong national schools in a number of other countries. England is one, as you say. Germany, of course, tremendous tradition, which takes in some gigantic people, including, of course, Johann Sebastian Bach. In the United States, there is a strong school of organ composition and playing and organ building too. And interestingly, most of these countries have developed distinctive national instrument types. And so just as the organ is different from one period to another in history, so it's remarkably different from one country to another.
I was just thinking that there are a few instruments that a musician could play that one has to travel the world to play on. I mean, most instruments are portable to some extent.
Yes.
Organs, not really so.
Not really so, and it makes on the credit side, it makes, of course, for an extraordinarily rich and varied musical interest. On the debit side, there's the question of the inconvenience of it, having to prepare each concert on a different organ is almost like starting from scratch. You can of course do a great deal of preparation and learn the music thoroughly before you play it, but it still has to be played on a specific instrument whose action and response and sound and actual console dimensions might be quite different. Things which crop up on your right-hand side on the organ you played last night crop up on the left-hand side, on the next instrument. Some organs are easy to play and you feel at home with them almost right away. Others you have to fight almost all the way, and you sometimes come across instruments where you're really very pleased to have the concert over because you never do feel entirely comfortable playing them.
Is there a recording of an organ that you've particularly enjoyed playing that we could put in here, perhaps much further afield than Newcastle or even Australia?
Well, one instrument which I recall with great affection is the organ, not a huge instrument, but a very, very fine one, in St. Michael's Church in New York. And it's not an American instrument, an instrument by a German builder, Rudolf von Beckerath, but a very, very fine one. And here's the organ now from St. Michael's Church in New York City.
prelude in E minor by Johann Sebastian Bach was performed on the organ of St. Michael's in New York by Michael Dudman. Michael, I'm interested to know what the music life of Newcastle was like when you began teaching here 25 years ago, in 1969.
I think there have been exciting developments, but certainly there has always been a strong musical life in Newcastle since I've been associated with the city. We've seen really exciting things, new things happen. The foundation of a professional orchestra here, now well on the way, is something which couldn't really have been envisaged 25 years ago. The building of the Conservatorium Concert Hall is another wonderful addition and wonderful new facility for musical life here. Newcastle on the Hunter seems to have been a prolific breeding ground for musical talent, and certainly I think the influence of the Conservatorium has been substantial over the years. There are many talented young people, and they go to study at conservatories in other places too, but increasingly they're studying here in Newcastle, and so the whole thing is tending to snowball.
You had some very fine predecessors too, who had a vision for the musical life of the city. I think people like Harold Lobb.
Yes, indeed. One thinks of Harold particularly, and his work as foundation principal of the Conservatorium. I think also of Keith Noak, who founded a very fine musical tradition at Newcastle Cathedral. And I think that the influence of the cathedral on Newcastle's musical life should also not be underestimated. There's a fine choral tradition there, and a very, very fine and effective large romantic organ. And the fact that we now have the Conservatorium organ as a sort of foil to that, an instrument in a different style, and of course many other smaller historic instruments in old churches in Newcastle and the Hunter Valley, makes organ music seem to happen here fairly easily and naturally.
We recorded recently a Baroque ensemble featuring players from the Conservatorium and some from Sydney in St Mary's at East Maitland, a very fine sounding building, and I'm sure there are many, many buildings like that around the Hunter. Is there a growth in so-called secular concerts in churches? I mean, I'm thinking of one particularly that you and I have spoken about before, where the French baritone Gérard Souzet turned up in a very dark-looking overcoat and sang a very dark song cycle by Schubert in the cathedral on the hill here.
Yes, I think people are realising just what a natural setting some of these churches afford for music, and often they have not only wonderful visual surroundings but fine acoustics as well. I've always enjoyed playing concerts myself in churches throughout the Hunter Valley, and I go to places like Muswellbrook and Scone and Singleton. Not only are the instruments fine old historic organs, but the audiences are very enthusiastic too, and there's a strong interest in hearing music in that setting, I believe.
This brings me to your broadcasting career. You've had opportunity to broadcast series on the ABC, on ABC FM, of organs of the Hunter Valley.
Yes, my association with broadcasting is really quite a long one now, because I began with a program which used to be called Young Australia. I think it's come back now, Young Australia, or is going to. And in those days, you used to use a landline. The PMG was part of the act, and they'd be fishing around under a manhole cover to find a landline, and off you'd go. Some of those were direct broadcasts, and some of them were recorded. I must confess I prefer working onto tape with recordings rather than direct broadcasts because they bring their own added tensions and so forth. But they were more part of the scene in those days than they seem to be now. The broadcasts have continued in series, as you say. We've done series like Organs of the Hunter Valley, 2 sets of programs on those, Historic Organs of Sydney and similar instruments in Western Australia and Tasmania. One just afoot, which we're hoping to press forward with. It will deal with great concert hall organs in Australia. And I've done various series on American and Canadian organs, as you know, because you've been involved with them. And I think the organ does lend itself to those sort of programs for the sorts of reasons we discussed earlier, the richness and variety of instruments and settings that are available.
Perhaps we could hear an extract from a work, the theme of which certainly would be known to everybody, the wonderful work by Colin Brumby, Captain Logan's Fancy.
Yes, that's one I enjoyed playing. I play it quite a lot, but I particularly enjoyed playing at St Catherine's Cathedral in Ontario, and of course we collaborated together over the recording and had the pleasure of the award which it won. So yes, I'd like people to hear that, both the organ music itself by Colin Brumby, which is very, very well written, and also the colours of the lovely Latourneau organ.
an extract from Captain Logan's Fancy by Colin Brumby, played by Michael Dudman, on the cathedral organ of St Catherine in the beautiful town or city of St Catherine in Ontario. I'm not sure whether the Canadians count that as a town or a city, but it's very close to a very majestic part of Canada, Niagara Falls.
Yes, indeed. Mm.
Majestic looking instruments, Michael. Perhaps this organ in the concert hall here, we can see it through the studio window. It's to be enlarged further, is it?
Yes, we've been so pleased about this. When the organ was completed in 1988, the funds at that time available didn't allow us to complete the design entirely. There's a swell organ and a great organ and a pedal organ also, but it really needs a third manual, a third division called a positive or rook positive, which will enable the performance more satisfactorily of music, particularly of the 18th century, of Bach and other composers of that period, because it'll make available a secondary chorus of comparable brilliance and balance to the great organ. And also it's our intention to strengthen the pedal organ, to give it rather more gravity and strength. Now this will mean adding a rank of 16-foot metal principal pipes to the pedal, and they'll make quite a stunning visual impact. It will really change the appearance of the whole organ and make it seem much larger. Mm-hmm. The rook positive division will probably be divided into two sides and split in that way, one side to the right and the other to the left of the organist at the same sort of level as the present console. A more traditional position would be immediately behind the organist's back, and you'll recall that when we worked at St Catherine's in Canada, that was the position for the positive division. But I think it's important in a concert hall, as opposed to a cathedral, for the player to be seen by the audience. And of course, if you're playing with orchestra, you must be able to see the conductor. So there are good reasons, I think, for some sort of scheme which will mean that the organist can still be seen. We don't know when that work will start. We're still very much at the opening stages of planning it, but it'll make the Newcastle organ one of the very finest of its kind you could imagine.
It certainly looks beautiful in the concert hall. It's certainly a focal point of a very fine auditorium.
It does draw the eye, doesn't it, to the front of the hall. And of course we're lucky that the hall has such a wonderful acoustic and seems to treat everything well. A single guitar playing quietly can be heard perfectly, and yet the hall copes well also with the big stuff, the big choral and orchestral and organ works that we are able to do from time to time.
I wonder if we can hear this organ built by Knut Smenger in the concert hall here, perhaps the bossy from your 25th anniversary concert, because it has a very showy pedal solo.
Yes,
it looked great.
Well, it's fun to play, but it's a very eventful piece, and one is always glad when it's over.
Right. little symphonic study by Bossi. Michael, certainly a very athletic piece. What, in your opinion, would be the most demanding organ work you've ever played?
It's hard to say. The big Liszt pieces, and especially Art Nos, are both technically difficult per se, and also long and emotionally and interpretively demanding. But probably some of the French pieces are as difficult as anything. I think I don't know of anything harder for the organ than the finale, for example, for the Sixth Symphony by Vienne, which is really very, very, very taxing indeed. Some of Reger's big organ pieces too are extremely difficult. So it's a mistake to think of the organ just as rather a churchy sort of instrument sustaining long, religious chordal sounds. It has its own concert repertoire, and some of that repertoire is really very taxing technically.
There was an interesting work we heard you perform here with pianist Catherine Davis, where it's very unusual to hear the piano and the organ together.
Yes, it's not a combination that's often used, and that piece worked very, very well, and it was fine to play it with Catherine Davis, who's such a splendid pianist. Dupre wrote another piece, I think it's Variations on Two Themes for organ and piano, and I have an idea there's a concerto for organ and piano by Flor Peters, but one doesn't often hear the piano with the organ.
We've heard you on ABC FM, Michael. That performance we've just listened to was recorded in last year's Keyboard Festival with Catherine Davis on the piano and yourself playing the organ. You said earlier that broadcasting of music, particularly live, is not so much a part of the ABC as it once was. Do you think the whole nature of broadcasting and what the people in charge think people want to hear has changed over the years?
Yes, I think that that's probably true. There's no doubt about it that the ABC has exercised an enormous influence over musical taste and has really done some extraordinarily fine work over the years. I think too that for many years it provided very rich opportunities for Australian performers to be heard in their own country, and certainly I've always enjoyed very, very much the association with the ABC, and there's a great deal that we've managed to achieve, I think. I'm pleased too with very pleased indeed with the programs for 2NUR, because really when we started I don't think much had been done in quite the same way. I first got the idea of the 2NUR programs by reading about the American organist E. Power Biggs' marathon broadcasts from the Harvard Bush-Reisiger Museum there, where he created tremendous interest with programs over very many years. I don't know if he broadcast right through the year, 52 weeks of the year as we do, but in any case, they were really substantial broadcast series, and so that was the model for our ones. But we're now up to program 230 or something of that kind. So there's been a lot of organ music go out over some 4 years in 2NUR.
And very little repertoire repeated, which is quite amazing. I mean, it's surprising to many people to think that there is that much organ music around.
Yes. Of course, the repertoire is a very wide one. I've always lent, to some extent, but particularly in recent years, to trying to play music that people will enjoy. I think that there is some danger in organ concerts that the organist will become totally preoccupied with his own wishes and his own likes and dislikes. And the organ, is a very static instrument. Although it's a very beautiful one, it can easily become inexpressive. And I think both that we need to take care that both the music we play and the way we play it will draw and keep the interest of the listener.
There's a choral prelude I'm thinking of that you've played by Bach, which has a very, very moving feel about it.
Yes, I think that might be the chorale prelude, Come Now, Saviour of the Heathen, one of the settings of that melody by Bach from the 18 great chorale preludes. And I'd like to listen with you, if I may, to a recording which we made working there together in a church in Canada at St. John's Church, Centenary Square, the uniting church there in the city of St. John's.
Certainly a very beautiful choral prelude by Johann Sebastian Bach, Come Now, Saviour of the Heathen. Michael, what organ music have you yet to play?
There's a great deal of Rega that I haven't learnt and perhaps never will get round to doing now. There's interest in, particularly at the moment, in Australian music. Australian composers are very active, and there are some very fine Australian composers producing music of many kinds. There hasn't been a great deal of Australian organ music. There is some, and some good music, but I'm hoping very much that the younger Australian composers will show an interest in the organ and perhaps write new and exciting organ music here. There's been no shortage of fine Australian organists, both present and past. We have fine instruments throughout the country. In each of the capital cities there's a large romantic organ built in the 19th century, and one thinks particularly of, say, of Sydney Town Hall. And there's also now a more modern neoclassical instrument, the Opera House in Sydney, the Clyce organ in the Cultural Centre in Brisbane, and others, of course. So there are plenty of good organs, and it would be good to see a real resurgence or a creation, at any rate, of a strong school of Australian organ composition.
What makes a musician successful? I mean, they can go along to lessons and study and become quite good, but what is it that enables them to make a career of it? I mean, I'm thinking particularly of organists, and if there's a perception that perhaps the public thinks, well, no, that belongs in churches, and yes, we'll hear it when we go there, but in the concert hall?
Yeah, it's a hard question to answer. I think that I mean, there are obvious qualities which you would hope to have something individual to say in terms of interpretation, perhaps. I think luck too plays a part. If you happen to be around at a time when you are able to be noticed, perhaps, and get a bit of a break. And I think that applies in all branches of music. You know, there are very, very many fine performers, singers, and instrumentalists who do very good work, and perhaps just haven't been fortunate in getting the breaks that some others have had.
Michael, you were the first artist in residence at the Sydney Opera House. What year was that, and what was the purpose of having that?
Well, that was back in 1985, and at that time I was given 6 months off from work here at the Conservatorium, and I spent the first part of it, the first 3 months, as artist in residence at the Opera House, and then the second part of it on tour in America, which was my first visit there to perform. The artist in residence period was fun, terribly hard work, because there were 16 public concerts to be given in that 3-month period, and some of them fell very close together. It's a big organ, and you know, you have to be continually changing registration and setting pistons and rehearsing in the hall. Sometimes it isn't easy to get rehearsal time, and you have to work there at, like, the Phantom of the Opera, you know, at 2 in the morning. I can remember trying to feel my way down the stairs in the dark on a number of occasions. There. The Opera House has its own buzz about it. You know, it's a very special place, I think, in Australian musical life, and it's always a great thrill to play there. we heard the Opera House organ then as I played the finale from Louis Vienne's first organ symphony, and I played that work there during my period as artist in residence. The recording, which is an ABC recording of some organ solos from the Opera House, had to be made, I recall, in the early hours of the morning, and we were there for 2 or 3 periods from, I think it was 1 o'clock till 4 o'clock. And it's hard to relax in that sort of time frame. It's hard to sort of wind down and go back to your motel room and hope to sleep. But you have to try and sleep because you've got to do the same thing then the next night, late at night.
Colourful characters in your time in Newcastle, 25 years making music here. You must have come across some colourful characters in our own town and even visiting artists. Who stands out?
Well, I remember with particular affection the dean of the cathedral at Newcastle when first I went there in the late 60s. John Falkingham was the dean, a very fine man, a very colourful character, and somebody who certainly liked to have things his way as far as the ordering of the services was concerned. A very kindly man and a colourful figure in the cathedral there. Early days were associated with the ABC to some extent too, and I can recall some distinguished visitors, including 1 or 2 quite troublesome visitors who had to have things exactly their way.
What, artists who the lighting was wrong, or
the lighting was wrong? The air conditioning in the hotel room couldn't be switched off or couldn't be switched on, and they certainly made their feelings known.
So it was your job to liaise at that time?
At that time, yes, I had a little music program up at the ABC for some years. Actually, it went on, and I enjoyed doing it. It gave an opportunity which has now vanished for local musicians to perform. There was always a local artist performing for half an hour in every program, every Monday afternoon, and there was a great deal of local music making. I can remember with pleasure my friendship with the late Mr. Tom Naseby, who had much to do with music in Newcastle, notably, of course, in his work as music critic for the Newcastle Herald, and working with other colleagues, people like Marjorie Biggins at the ABC for many years, Errol Collins, the violinist who has been associated with the development of music in Newcastle for such a long time, and then there have been visiting musicians that in whose visits one could take real pleasure. My former mentor at the organist of Ely Cathedral, Dr. Arthur Wills, came as our guest here for the Keyboard Festival in 1992, and it was a great joy to see him here. He composed some music, especially for the 92 festival, and so visitors like Arthur Wills have also added a considerable sort of lustre and interest to the musical life here.
Thank you.
Catherine Capewell and Michael Dudman performing The Lamb by William Blake. That's Arthur Will's setting, and that was the world premiere recording at the 1992 Keyboard Festival here at the University of Newcastle Conservatorium of Music. What are your hopes for the futures, perhaps say for the next 10 years of music in Newcastle?
I believe that it's terribly important that the permanent orchestra be established. I should like to see a similar establishment in terms of opera. Certainly, there's operatic activity here, and there's every hope that it might become firmly established in the future. I believe we have a wonderful building block, so to speak, here in the conservatorium, and the conservatorium's amalgamation with the university has given it genuine substance. It's made it possible to offer university degrees to music students, not only first degrees, but to work for masters and even doctoral degrees. These are all exciting possibilities for the future.
This year's Keyboard Festival, Miriam Hyde is coming. Is that right?
Yes.
Or is that not out of the bag yet?
No. That's an established fact. She's coming to talk about her own music. She's going to play the Liszt B minor sonata, a huge piece, and on the same program, I'm playing the sort of B minor counterpart for the organ, the Ardnos Fantasia. So I'm looking forward very, very much indeed to being associated with her in that way.
We haven't had time to play the whole of that fabulous work by Liszt. It came to 28 minutes when we recorded it at your concert in March. But as we say goodbye and thank you for talking to us today, let's hear the very ending of this fabulous work by Liszt. Michael Dudman, thank you very much.
Thank you for allowing me to reminisce about the 25 years. A lot has happened during that time, and it's nice just to take time out for a few moments to recall some of it.
We've been listening to a special edition of Aspects from the Conservatorium, in which we marked Professor Michael Dudman's 25th year of performing and teaching in Newcastle.